Any advice for a young counselor soon to finish his degree? What do you wish you knew as a young therapist? Well, let's start with advice. Um, well, one thing I would say is you could go to my book list and read the books that are there. There's at on my website, there is a list of recommended books, fiction, nonfiction, and the nonfiction is categorized in different ways. There's a psychotherapy section. I would say read those books. That would be helpful. Those people, Jung, Freud, Rogers. I think there's something by Adler, Henri Ellenberger, some of the existentialists from the 1950s. A lot of neuroscientist types, very, very smart people, very, very useful to know what they had to say. So then the next thing I would suggest, and you've heard this from me before, perhaps, is that it's almost impossible to overestimate the degree to which merely listening is helpful if you're a counselor. Lots of people have no one to listen to, have no one that will listen to them. And that's a real problem because people actually think by talking. And so for many people who are isolated, they have no one to talk to. So that means they don't think. And that means that their thoughts aren't straight and organized. And you might think, well, why does that matter? But the reason it matters is because the best analogy I would say to thoughts is the best way of conceptualizing the structure of your thoughts is to consider it in the same manner that you might consider a map. And your map should be organized and things should be in the right place, because otherwise when you use the map to navigate in the world, you don't end up where you want to be and you run into things that you don't want to encounter. And so it's actually extraordinarily necessary to get your thoughts in order, since they help you simulate the world before you act in it. And so don't underestimate how important it is just to listen. And then you think, let's think about listening too. So someone comes to you and they come to you because they have a problem. Now you don't know what their problem is, and neither do they. All you know is that they have enough of a problem to come and talk to you. So then they might have a problem because really terrible things have happened to them, and anyone with any sense would have a problem. And so then they have problems in life, say, or they have existential problems, not really psychological problems, even though it might be psychologically demanding to adapt to the real problems. You want to listen and you want to find out, well, what exactly is the problem space? And how much of that is practical and how much of it is psychological? So the first issue is you don't know what the problem is, and you want to ask a lot of questions to find out what it is. And also what it isn't, because often people will come in and they're upset and they don't exactly know why they're upset, and they might be upset about a whole bunch of things, and it isn't until after they talk through all the things they might be upset about that they find out what they're upset about and what they're not. So another reason to listen, especially at the stage of problem formulation, is to help people decide what their problems aren't. Well, then the next thing you have to do to listen is like, okay, well, now we know what the problem is. Well, what would your client view as a potential solution? So assuming that this could be made better in some manner, what would better look like? So you need to co-develop a philosophy of what's better. And so that's a goal or an aim. And it's almost like a personalized definition of mental health, but it might be better to think about it as a personalized definition of a good life. And so that's the next thing you have to listen about. And then the last thing you have to listen about and negotiate as well is, okay, well, now we know what your problem is, and we know hypothetically what the destination is with regards to solving that problem. Is what are the strategies that are necessary to implement in order to make that positive outcome occur? And then that's something that you negotiate by listening every week. It's like, okay, well, here's the goal. What steps could we take that you would implement that would move you towards that goal? Can you take those steps in the world? Will you do that this week? And then watch whether or not you do it and come back and report. And also tell me and yourself whether or not implementing that actually worked. And then we can come back and we can have a discussion about whether you did it or not. And if you didn't, then how we could modify that. And if you did, how we could continue and expand it. And if you did do it, whether it worked, and if it and what unexpected things occurred, and what, if any, implications there are for understanding your problem and for your goal. And so, you need, it's a map. You have a starting point. You have to figure out what that is. You have a destination point, the desired future. You have to figure out what that is. You have to implement and design strategies that will move the person forward. And then you have to test all those strategies. Very strategic thinking, very practical thinking. And so that's an outline of how to do effective psychotherapy, I would say, effective, careful psychotherapy. Another bit of advice is people often who are young counselors are afraid and don't know how they can not take their clients' problems home. And I've got a couple of things to say about that. The first is they're not your problems. And it's very important to remember that. It's partly you don't want to steal your client's problems. I mean, you might think, well, if I could take my client's problems on myself and lift the burden from them, well, wouldn't that be better? And the answer is, well, no, because someone's problems are not that distinguishable from their life. And what you're there to do is facilitate their ability to learn to grapple successfully with the existential vagaries of their own existence. And you don't want to leap in there and steal it. Like, let's say you give a spectacular piece of advice, and you're going to give advice now and then, but it's not that advisable. Then let's say you advise someone to solve a problem in a certain way, and they go do it, and the problem's solved. It's like, well, the problem's disappeared, but they didn't learn how to generate the solution to the problem, and so they're in worse shape with future problems, and it's your victory in some sense instead of theirs. And so you don't want to steal from your client's destiny. And that also frees you up to some degree, because it also means that you're not morally obligated to take on those problems and carry them home. And the other thing is that it doesn't do your client any good for their problems to sink you. You have a moral obligation, an ethical obligation, a professional obligation to remain sufficiently detached from the situation so that your head is clear and you remain healthy and your practice remains viable for the long run. And so don't forget to protect yourself. It's very, very important. Let your clients sort out their lives. You're there to help. You're there as a sounding board. You're there as a strategic you're there to offer strategic advice. You're there to shed light on the symptomatology and to lay out potential strategies for treatment, all of that. And so, and that's good enough. You don't take on any more than that.